Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 6 of season 2 of Chapter Select, a seasonal podcast where we bounce back and forth between a different series of games and explore their evolution, design, and legacy. For this season, we are covering the God of War series, and today's episode, as you can tell by the title, is going to be all about God of War 3, or technically God of War 3 Remastered, because that's what we played. I am your host, Logan Moore. Joining me, as always, for this God of War discussion is Max Roberts. Hi, Max.
Hi, Logan. Yeah, I guess technically it's God of War 3 Remastered, but they're the same game. Just one's a little bit prettier, a little bit smoother.
If the trophy lists don't transfer between games, then they're different. That's the rule that Mark Cerny created, I think.
But what about the save data? So it's purely
Can you transfer the save data?
Not for God of War 3, but I was thinking Spider-Man. So the trophy lists are separate, but the saves transfer.
That's an evil dark magic hack that they've come up with recently, which probably shouldn't be allowed. But sometimes you got to do those things because.
I mean, yeah, you got to get the plat, right?
I still haven't. I mean, this is a total aside. I still have not done that for Spider-Man, even though I have all the trophies in that game. Even the DLC
You just have
ones.
a free plat you just want to cash in. You're saving it for when you get in a bet.
I've told you this, but like when I replay games, and I think we've talked about it kind of with the God of War games too. The ones where I did not have full trophy lists to pursue were the ones where I was like, oh man, this kind of sucks. Like the original God of War and God of War 2 I had played previously, so I didn't have really any trophies to gain on the main path throughout the game. I like getting trophies over the course of a 15 to 20 hour game that I'm playing. So I've intentionally not gotten them in the Spider-Man one because if I replay that game, which I want to do, especially before the sequel comes out, I think I would just prefer to get up paying all the trophies again as I go through it. I don't know.
I mean, you totally can.
And then if I get to the end and it's like I don't feel like doing all these like clear out the warehouse missions or whatever, then I could just transfer the save afterward and do that. That's very strange, I know, but I like the satisfaction of seeing it ping one after another, like once every 20 or 30 minutes, get a little trophy ping. Keeps your what's the chemical thing that makes you happy? Keeps my serotonin levels high, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
Serotonin.
Endorphins? I don't know. My brain
I'm
went
not
to
a
nicotine,
biologist
or
a chemist or whatever the heck. I write for a living, and I do it very poorly, to be honest. But anyway, God of War 3. So this episode, as you can tell, this is our 6th episode of the season. If you have not been following along with the Season 2 so far, this is our final episode of the original God of War arc, which is, God of War 3 is the final game of the Greek God of War arc. Typically, we bounce back and forth, like we said at the top. Play the first game in the series, then play the most recent one, but we put God of War 2018 at the end of this series, which we have talked about multiple times over the course of this podcast. If you want to hear more about why we did that, just go listen to episode 1 if you haven't already. But yeah, this episode is going to be all about God of War 3, which means we will be closing out the Greek Pantheon this time around.
You know, it was your idea to slightly tweak the structure this way for this particular season, and I've told you off air throughout this season and whatnot, but I am again really excited that you convinced me of this, because especially playing this game, the hype to replay God of War 2018, which I've already played twice now, so this will be my third go around.
You have 2 playthroughs and you don't have the plat? That's pretty shameful. Come on.
Well, it was a lighter casual playthrough with Abby, so it wasn't. I was just doing the story beats. Yeah, I'm glad that we did it this way, and I'm very, very excited to start 2018 very soon.
Yeah, I downloaded that on my PS5 today, and as I did, I was like, oh yeah, they put out an update for this game. Heck yeah.
4K 60, baby.
4K 60 FPS on the PS5. Let's go. Yeah, that'll be... I have not replayed that game, conversely. So the last time I played that game, going off my platinum status on that game would have been May 2018, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I have not touched that game in over 3 years. So Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to diving back into that. But God of War 3, that's a game we played this week. Let's break down everything about this one. So once again, the game was developed by Sony Santa Monica Studio. It came out on the PlayStation 3. It was later remastered for PlayStation 4, which is the version we played. That game's part of the PS Plus collection. So if you have PlayStation Plus, you own that game. Congratulations. It released on March 16th, 2010. The remaster came out July 14th, 2015. The game director was Stig Asmussen.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how you say his name.
Yeah.
The producer was Steve Caterson. Combat lead was Adam Poole. And then music, once again, was Gerard Marino, with help from Ron Fish, Mike Reagan, Chris Velasco, and Jeff Rona, who was new this time around.
Mm-hmm. I actually did my research for the music this time. It wasn't so much that Gerard was leading, while he does have most of the credits because he's been with God of War the longest, along with some of these other composers. But they apparently all just composed their own tracks and like that fused together to become the soundtrack. It wasn't like a lead composer and then the rest underneath. They were all apparently equals in the creation of the music for the game.
That makes sense with how this game is structured, though, because it is very much you go from one god to the next, and each one kind of has their own different vibe and tone to them and has their own little area. And the previous games have been like that, too, but perhaps for this one that made more sense than even normal. Metacritic this time around, once again coming in at a very high score for the most part. 92 out of 100 for the original version on PlayStation 3. Do you know what the remaster got, out of curiosity?
81.
81. That sounds about right. As a game reviewer myself who like contribute, I'll just say this. Like when I review remasters, it's hard for me to ever want to like rate them high, because if you just played the game and it's like, yep, this is a remaster, I feel like I usually just try to default to giving it about an 8 or so. There has to be some other special things in the mix for me to usually want to go higher on certain remasters, whether that be like bonus content they included or
it's
all the DLC being folded in as well.
It's definitely a struggle to balance it. It's like, because this game, God of War 3 may be, a 92 or 93 out of 100 in general, but then all they've really added was a photo mode and I guess it was 1080 60, and I think later there's a pro patch to bring it up to 4K. I'll double check that.
Yeah.
But like it was just a resolution bump, frame rate bump, and photo mode. So where do you? It's a tough thing to balance, I think.
I mean, even when you look at the Metacritic for the remastered version, like some of the pull quotes here, like you had PlayStation Universe gave it a 9 out of 10, but they say, as far as remasters go, God of War 3 is a welcome but unnecessary one. The single addition of a photo mode and updated graphics are something that just aren't worth paying $40 for a 5-year-old game. Yeah, like that's how I feel. Like if you're not including anything super noteworthy, it just feels like you're kind of trotting out the same thing and are just trying to, hey, let's get more money from this in a very easy way. We can get more people to pay for this game, so sure, let's just release it again. And so that's something I'm typically very critical of. But yeah, it doesn't ever speak to the quality of the game itself, because you're not, I don't know. When I review remasters, I feel like I'm reviewing what's been remastered and then the additional things around the edge, more so than the game itself. Anyway, God of War 3, Max. What was your experience with this one? Obviously, you've played it before, but have you played it just once or a bunch of times? Or
this is my third go around with God of War 3. Played it twice before. I played it once on PS3, and then back in 2018, before that the PS4 God of War game came out, I replayed 1, 2, and 3. And that time I played it on the remaster version on my PS4. And then I've done that once again this time around. I remember, I think anyone who was following God of War or PlayStation at the time remembers their E3 demo with the Titan fight and Helios and that whole fight with the it's not a manticore, but the snake, lion, and goat.
It's a no, I know what the name of it is. It's a.
It'll come to you.
Yeah.
So it's that demo though. It's really, I think it's actually one of PlayStation's more iconic demos that people can remember.
Chimera.
Thank you. So it was that demo, and at Best Buy you could play that demo at some point, probably closer to launch, not around that particular E3. And I remember being in a Best Buy somewhere, and they had one of those gaming rocking chairs, like the ones that just are curved and they sit on the floor, and they probably had speakers in them. And it was some Best Buy demo kiosk. No one else was around. This big TV sitting on the floor in the middle of a Best Buy, and I played that demo there. And this was before I had a PS3, and I went, I need to play that. I need this to play that, because I just thought it was so cool. And it was one of the first PS3 games that I bought when I finally got a console in 2011. So yeah, I've loved God of War 3 so much. What about you?
Yeah, so I've played this before, played it on PS3. I've not played the remaster. Yeah, when I started getting really into like consuming E3 each year and stuff like that, it was around like the 360 and PS3 era. I would say I really started to pay attention to like E3 being the tentpole show each year. E3 and what used to be, what's now the Game Awards, what was like the Spike VGAs or VGUs or whatever. Yeah, at the time, I really started getting into that stuff, in addition to, like reading gaming magazines and stuff, which was primarily how I think I had consumed gaming media beforehand. Probably around the time that this game would have been getting shown off at those kind of shows. So about 2008, 7, 8.
It
this came
been
out in 2010.
2008 and 9.
So I distinctly remember like being exposed to this game at those shows, and I was like, okay, I need to play this at some point in the future. I need to play these games finally, because people say they're awesome. The new one looks really cool. I distinctly remember that Helios demo that you were talking about. I remember they showed off something with the Poseidon fight before release as well.
Trailer, yeah.
Yeah, maybe it was like a preview they did on XPlay or something like that. Because I remember XPlay was talking about this game a lot back in the day. It was really big that this was coming out. So I remember like seeing a lot of those moments, but it wasn't until a few years later that I had played it for the first time. So yeah, I mean, this was the game that really pushed me to kind of try to find a way to play the other two, which I eventually did, like I've talked about on the show before in the previous episodes. And yeah, I mean, basically just how this one previewed and how this one looked really pushed me to get into this series more so than any of the critical praise or anything like that from the other ones, because I had obviously known the others were good, but it wasn't until this game's hype cycle really started that I was like, okay, I must play these at some point.
I should get on board.
Yeah, so whenever I got a PS3, I started trying to look into that, and a few years later, eventually did it. So coming back to this, because this would have been the first time in, I don't know. I mean, again, I could look up my original trophies for the original game. I don't necessarily need to, unless you want to. But this would be the first time I've played this game in probably 7 or 8 years. Knee-jerk reaction. I guess I'll start. This is probably the best one I think we've played so far.
Yes.
For some reason, I always remember thinking I liked 2 more. And 2 is really good. I'm not poo-pooing God of War 2 at all. But of the 6 that we have played so far, this one is probably aged the best. The pacing is the big thing that I think is great in this game. I sat down Monday, and I think I was right around that Helios fight or something. Maybe even, I wasn't very far in. I had basically done the opening with Poseidon. I had played about an hour of the game. I sat down Monday, and by the time I went to bed Monday, I was at Zeus ready to fight Zeus. For reference, we're recording this on a Wednesday. So I basically beat the entirety of this game in a single day. And this is one of the longer ones, and it doesn't feel like it at all because they keep putting things in front of you every couple minutes, which are a ton of fun. We'll get into it more with the gameplay stuff, but the items they give you in this one are by far the best they've given you in any of the games. This is, for some reason, I did not think this one was, I don't know. It wasn't that I thought it was bad, but for some reason it never made like an extreme impression on me when I played it for the first time.
Yeah.
But now having come back, no, this is a very fun game. First and foremost, I think. Like, it's hard not to have a good time playing this one.
It absolutely is. I had a similar thing this time around, and I honestly believe each time I've played this game, it just has this infectious pace to it that you just one more boss, or let me just get to the next area. Like, let me do one more thing because it's so grand and epic. And I know these words are used quite a bit actually in game criticism, but really I do think this honestly captures the spirit because of just the scale of it and the notion of destroying the Greek gods of Olympus and tearing it all down. It really is that big, grandiose action adventure game. To momentarily circle back to your trophies, I think I have a better picture now of your God of War experience. You beat the game according to your trophies back in on May 14th of 2015.
Okay.
Which was just a couple of months before the PS4 remaster. But
I think they would have announced the PS4 remaster at E3 though, is the thing.
Maybe, possibly. But if we go back and we look at your God of War 2 trophies, you got those in late April of 2015. So you clearly were playing the God of War trilogy like in those early months of 2015.
Early college years. Why was I playing these in college? I don't I don't know why that was a thing. Did we no, we wouldn't have been doing our previous podcast by that point.
We started.
We would have a couple more. We would have done it a couple months later. I think would have been like
we were talking at that point. For sure. So we started our show in March of 2015. So actually, you were playing those.
So if we listen to some early episodes of our show, Millennial Gaming Speak, which is now actually totally available to listen on podcast services, thanks to Max doing some work on that front the past week or so. I wonder if I talk about these.
But yeah, I mean, God of War 3, PlayStation announced that we're bringing God of War 3 to PS4, and it was just hooray. Are we supposed to celebrate that? I played that game 5 years ago. I didn't play that game 5 years ago. I'm hoping to play that game within the next couple of weeks, but that's another story.
Yeah, I'm curious. It's so interesting. I mean, around that time, PT was out.
I definitely would have talked about playing these on the show. For reference too, by the way. So this is very weird. Like, I'm piecing it, we're piecing this together retroactively. God of War 3 Remastered was announced in March 2015. So did I see that get announced? And I was like, hold up, wait, I never played these. I'm gonna play them now. Because like that's the catalyst, I think, for me to then play 1 and 2 the month after.
I remember your story being that a friend in your neighborhood got a PS3 bundle that came with God of War 1 and 2.
That's true, and I still borrowed that from him, I believe.
So maybe perchance you played those and were just in I need to play God of War 3 now, like I can't wait until July?
Maybe. I think it may have just jogged my memory of like, oh yeah, I never played these, I should do that. But also, where did I play them? I remember this because this would have been first year of the PS. This is such an aside. I'm sorry if you don't care about any of this, but the first year, much like or Or well, I was gonna say much like I do now, but that's not true. Did you still have your PS3 hooked up when the PS4 came out? Because I definitely did for probably a good 18 months to 2 years, I would say.
Logan, I still have my PS3 hooked up, and I have a PS5, so yes.
I mean, I still have my PS3 hooked up to my main entertainment center now. But eventually I put it away in storage at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I also used to have a TV in my... Anyway, this is... Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what prompted this. Maybe there are podcast documents that we can go refer to and find out. But anyway, everything I said previously, though, still stood true about how, like, me seeing this game at E3 made me want to play it. Apparently, the wait for me to actually play it, though, was 5 years for some reason. I don't know why. I don't know. Time is
Someday
weird
we'll
when
figure it
you're
out.
younger, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this game is good. I don't know. I know we usually start with the story. Let's save the story for the end this time, because the story is going to kind of tee up some things with the next God of War that I would like to touch on before we transition into that episode. Sure. So let's talk more about the gameplay, because gameplay wise, yeah, this is the main reason why this one I think is the best. It just, the gameplay in a lot of the others has been very tight and very good, but they don't give you the toys that this one gives you. And that is why this one is very good. Like in the past, we've talked about how some of these other games give you secondary weapons to use, but most of the time I feel like when we've talked about our own experience, we're like, oh yeah, I didn't ever deviate from the chains though. I deviated from the chains in this game a decent amount, especially when it comes to the big old Hercules fists. But even outside of that, there's a lot. Even in the final boss with Zeus, I was bouncing between a bunch of, I think all 4 different of my weapons at one time or another. So this game really gives you a lot of things to use, and I think it makes each item unique to the point that you feel compelled to use all of the different, maybe not all of them, but some different aspects that each of them have to them. Do you agree with that?
Oh yeah. There's a good chance I used the Hercules line fist more than the blades. I was all about him this time around. It is your tool set, I think, is perfect, because in the past we've talked about in God of War 1, like the Poseidon magic, the lightning AoE, like that was our favorite. But the rest were kind of fine or good, or who cares? Or heck, even in the Chains of Olympus episode, we couldn't even remember the magic they gave you because it was just so forgettable. And the only side weapon was the gauntlet, which I personally forgot about until the final boss when I was stuck. But this game, every power-up stuck with you as you earned them and gained them. And I part of that could be the pacing of it, but also just the design and gameplay elements of these weapons. You go from a bow to the head of Helios, which is a stun, but also a flashlight, to weapons like Hades' claws, which arguably are just different blades of chaos. And then you get to the Hercules fist, which are arguably just different blades of chaos. And then you get the sickle electric things, which arguably are different blades of chaos. So maybe they just figured out that we need to give you different blades with different powers, but they all feel good and have different heft to them. Some quite literally heavy and others snappier and electric. It just all feels good. And the way that they connect them, all of the gameplay from a grab to a heavy hit to a light hit, is so fluid and fast and lets you keep the combos going. You were talking about how you use the bow to keep combos going at a distance, and then you'd go in and close it off with a different type of weapon. Yeah,
I think the bow in particular is like one of the best secondary items they've ever given you in any of these games, because it really just helps you chain together combos that much better. It doesn't work well with large groups, except for the fire. It kind of does. You can get one person on fire, and then they can connect it to other people, and that's really cool. But yeah, is it the Bow of Apollo? Is that
Bow of Apollo?
Yeah, the Bow of Apollo. I love that. It's such a simple thing in practice, but what's great about it, because they've given you ranged items, ranged abilities like this in the past, and this is very similar actually to the magic little ball orb chuck thing that I think you have in it's Chains of Olympus. Yeah. It's pretty similar to that in some ways, but you can obviously fire it way faster, and it doesn't use up your magic meter. It uses up a totally different meter that they put into this game for the first time, I believe, right?
It technically predated Ghost of Sparta. Ghost of Sparta had the fire meter, which wasn't too dissimilar in that concept.
Yeah. So yeah, I love the bow. I think the bow's great. The other thing I wanted to add about all the different main weapons, though, that I liked is that they even have different aspects to each of them that you wouldn't think about. Like, for instance, I really like that the Hades claws, there is like a different right stick dodge to it. Rather than dodging, he throws the hook and pulls himself somewhere else, and you can get a little further. He dodges further because of that. They even like tweak little like ancillary aspects about that they wouldn't in the previous games. They would add a little bit of extra flair to each of the items in certain ways. And then the other thing is they tie the magic then to the weapons as well. So the magic isn't an independent system, but they tie specific magical abilities to each of them, which prompts you to then... That's the one thing that prompted me to switch it up the most, I think, because my least favorite weapon of the four is the electrical whip things. I couldn't figure out how to use them well. I know they're not bad because I've seen people like in walkthroughs using them a lot, but I just couldn't get a good grasp on them. But the thing I did like was the electric shock attack that you can use, because it was a really good way to deal like AoE damage to a large group of enemies. So I like that, and so I would bounce over to that just to use the magical ability on that every now and then switch back over to the fists and deal out some more direct damage in that way. Like, I felt like I was using every aspect of my kit in this game for the first time, rather than just being like, oh, they gave me this, I don't like that, I'm going to keep using this, because that's what I've done in all the other 5 games up until this point, have been that exact thing. And even when they try to do interesting things like the Spartan arms and Ghost of Sparta or something like that, it's like, okay, this is cool. I don't like this, though. Back to the chains. No, I mean, everything in this game I feel like got pretty equal use to me, at least to some degree. I mainly did the chains and the fists, but then I would loop in the others as well, occasionally, depending on what I needed, because they each had really unique abilities. Especially with the souls, with the Hades claws. I told you one strategy I used on those, but there are some satyr. There's one part in the game we played on hard too. There's one part later in the game
because we continued our platinum journey, which again we have platinumed the game.
I've almost platinumed all of them. God of War 1 is the only one I haven't platinumed, and it makes me feel kind of bad.
You
now.
Quite easily could do it in 3 hours one morning. Just like a Saturday. It's not hard. It's just
But that's 3 hours I could spend on something else.
No, but it's a platinum. And then you could have all the God of War platinums like me, which I'll have here in a month.
Maybe. Anyway, yeah. Well, you said you didn't know if you were going to, but you should. Because the God of War platinum's good. Yeah, like there's one point late in the game that I was having trouble with where you have to fight a big old fire dog, and then they throw 3 satyrs in the mix. And satyrs in this game are probably the toughest enemy type, I think. It's really difficult to kill them, and I couldn't do it. And I looked up some help online, and I found somebody who said, hey, one of the souls with your Hades chains that you can use, because you have, I think, like 9 different souls you can use with the Hades chains. They can summon different creatures and different people to come in and do special abilities. One of them that you can summon is just a Gorgon who just comes in and freezes things. So if you line it up properly, you can get the satyrs rock solid with the Gorgon. You have to be careful though, because that ability is so strong it uses up literally half of your magic bar. Like they realize how overtuned that is. So you have to be very careful with how you do it. And eventually I got it lined up and I froze the satyrs rock solid and crushed them, and I was like, okay, cool. Now I just have to focus this dumb dog. But yeah, like there's like, anyway, long story short, all the weapons are great. They all have different elements that I used at one point or another to help me get to the end of the game. Yes, very good job on the weapon design this time, Sony Santa Monica. Very, very good job.
Yeah, and I think that also leads into the fluidity of combat. I found, so typically, you can launch something, you can grab, you're light, you're heavy, and you can jump, and then you could do like L1 square and do maybe your spin attack with the blades, or L1 triangle, do a heavier thing. But then they also added something. L1 circle was also a previous combo, but then they added L1 X as a rapid switch. Like you could just switch to the next weapon instead of punching on the D-pad to keep your combo going without interrupting it. Oh my gosh. Awesome. I loved it. And then maybe you got a group of enemies coming around you and you stun them all. And then you could grab one with circle. And then from that, you could either punch them, rip them apart, use them as a battering ram into other enemies, or throw them at other people. There was always an option to do. And those options were always on the face buttons. So it was never far out of reach or difficult really to memorize. It was accessible and felt really good and fun. And it really is the best feeling God of War game that we've played so far. And I think that's a huge accomplishment considering we've played, 5 other games.
Yeah.
And I kind of also think that it's really surprising how Ascension feels, because
like
Ascension is
this?
made. Yes, because they really nailed it. Like, they threw it, I say throw away a little harshly, but they threw it away because they took multiplayer and then applied it to the single player.
Yeah.
And they had to slow things down for multiplayer, which led to more heft, which led to those alternate weapons. And they really had the combat nailed in this game. And then it's shocking how far Ascension strays from this formula.
Well, there are a lot of things Ascension does. Like, Ascension's way uglier. I know we played a PS4 remaster of this game, but even color palette wise, there's so much more going on in this game. Yeah, Ascension's ugly, man. That game is just not. That game is so weird that it released after this. What, 3 years later, right? 2013?
Yep, 2013.
Yeah. There
was a quote where John Haidt, I don't actually know who John Haidt is in this context, but the quote was at the to Joystick in January of 2010. He said, "While God of War 3 will conclude the trilogy, it won't spell the end of the franchise," aka they were in pre-production for Ascension.
I remember them saying this at the time too. Other people, I think, said it. Yeah,
we're going to be really careful about what we do next, and it's just
we're gonna be really careful, and by that we're gonna adopt the norms of the day, which is multiplayer everything, because that's basically what they did.
I give them props for trying, and then I also give them props for pivoting away from it when the time came.
I wonder how, obviously this is probably very well documented because this game itself is very well documented, the God of War 2018. I wonder how quickly they had the idea after this to go to a different pantheon and use different gods. Because clearly it's something that I think even Corey has talked about, that they obviously had ruminated on for a pretty long time. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it was Ascension kind of sucking that led to them going, okay, let's do that idea now. Or if it was something they were kind of working on even behind the scenes throughout Ascension's cycle. And again, Corey wasn't when did Corey go back to Sony Santa Monica? Do you happen to know?
I do. I had the post.
Because Tomb Raider came out in 2013 as well, I believe, and that he worked on that. So I believe he probably would have gone back around the same time.
He came back in... Where is this? Returns to Santa Monica, August of 2013. Okay. So this was post Ascension. But actually, speaking of Corey, he left in November of 2007. So just 6-7 months after God of War 2 came out into pre-production on 3.
Which is pretty normal.
I watched the documentary This documentary was literally the same crew just stayed there. They just shot God of War 2 documentary and then kept shooting for God of War 3. They didn't leave. They didn't stop.
They're really good about documenting this stuff. They really are. Like, they've been doing this for over a decade with their games. Well,
It's
over a
really-
decade. Like 15 years they've been doing this.
It's rare to actually see, especially from a big first-party developer. I think it's quite rare for them to be so forthcoming about the development of their games. And so, yeah, it's fascinating to just see how they've pivoted both ways. I do remember David Jaffe saying his original vision was for Zeus to actually die at the end of God of War 2 and God of War 3 to be about this power vacuum in Greece and having Egyptian and Norse gods coming in to like fill this vacuum. So they were thinking about other pantheons of mythology, way back in the day.
It was something they've been toying around with for a while, but they're like, wait, we should probably kill all of the ones in the current pantheon we're in before we move on elsewhere. Before we have this man go fight Odin and Thor.
Speaking of Thor and Odin, I think another great thing that God of War 3 does, which Ragnarok is also seeming to do, is saving the best for last. God of War 2018 teases Thor the entire game and Odin, but you never actually see them. Except for Thor at the very, 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 very end as a tease for Ragnarok. And God of
You
War
don't
3
actually
is
see him. That's a dream, don't you know? But it feels like the future.
So God of War 3 does this as well, right? We've been waiting the whole series up to this point, 3 games before, so this is technically the 4th. We're waiting to fight a Hades, Poseidon. We got to fight Zeus at the end of God of War 2, but it didn't end in a satisfying way. Even the Titans, to a certain degree, we didn't necessarily think we were going to fight them per se, but you end up fighting all the Titans as well. The game does so good at, like you were saying earlier, pacing out these bosses. I mean, you start out by killing one of the big 3, and then the second boss is another one of the big 3.
Yeah, you kill 2 of your uncles to start this game very quickly. But it doesn't the thing I like is that it doesn't have their sort of like effect on this world feel lost even though they're gone. One, because they've died and then things happen because of their deaths. But I like even like later on that you start toying around like Poseidon's area of Mount Olympus, like reminding you like, oh yeah, you killed him earlier, but this was like a huge dude who had like a whole section of this place that you're in, and so now we're gonna send you to where he was kind of his stomping grounds. And I really like that as well. They do a really good job of making you feel like this is their home. This is where they reside. This is where they chill. You are an unwelcome intruder in their homes, and you're uprooting all of it. And they're very mad about that.
They do it so well in Hades. The whole time you're down in the location.
Oh, you mean like your
Hades.
5th trip to Hades in this series?
Sure. Yeah, he's
The game starts with you falling off another cliff going to Hades. I was like, oh, I forgot
it's just the
about
norm.
that. I forgot that he was the opening, like outside of Poseidon. I forgot that he was like the first main path boss once the game kind of starts after the big grand opening. And I couldn't help but laugh.
And the whole time you're in there, Hades himself is taunting and saying like, you're in my domain. You even pull up Persephone in her coffin, her glass Snow White coffin. Yeah. Witness the end, Spartan. You really do feel like you're invading their space and tearing it all down. And it's so satisfying.
Yeah, they do a really good job of building all of that up. The thing though that I like about each of the gods is that not all of them are these big bosses as well. Like you fight Poseidon, it's a huge fight. You fight Hades, and it's a huge fight. But when you find Hermes, for example, well, he's kind of a ninny. You don't really need to go toe to toe with him in the way that you would Hades. So it's more of a chase. You do
go toe to toe with him when you chop his legs off.
You do, yes. But that fight is not you're not fighting the same way that you did against the other ones who are more powerful. It doesn't try to turn boss fights into boss fights for the sake of it. It actually, what it does really well is it respects Kratos' own power. Like,
Yeah.
Kratos is very strong. If he gets a hold of Hermes, it's just going to be game over, the end. He's not going to need to go toe-to-toe with this guy because he's Kratos. He's literally the god of war in this realm. He could kill this guy in 2 seconds if he really wanted to.
If he can just get a hold of him. Helios too. I mean,
Yeah.
he gets knocked down by the Titan and you just walk up and kill some enemies and bam,
He says
Helios is gone.
He says, "Feel the power of the sun" or something, and then like the sunny delight, and then Kratos is just like, "I'm just gonna put my hand up in front of my face, and that'll do here." But yeah, I really like that as well because it gives you that satisfaction of another one off the list. But you're not like when you again later with Hera, she's not like all of a sudden got these crazy powers. She's just drunken, sad, and angry, and Kratos is like, okay, I'll just kill you, and then I'll throw your body in this basin I found. Or
Pretty much. And kind of on the other end of that spectrum, they also know how to make it like truly epic beyond a Poseidon or a Hades. Look at Kronos. Kronos is still one of the craziest fights. Like, just to remember this, the quite literal scale of it. You are crawling on his arms, in his chest, in his stomach. The whole thing, it's just so big.
Yeah, they do a really great job with that fight. The scale of this game overall from minute 1 is something they really do a great job of as well. Again, putting into context that Kratos is very powerful, but also he's so, like, in the grand scheme of what he's trying to do here, he is so, like, outmatched, you would think on paper. Obviously, he blows through everything because he's Kratos and he's the protagonist and he has to do that. But, like, it makes him seem like he is up against these insurmountable odds from the start, and the only reason he's able to even get where he's at from the start is because of the help of the Titans. And then that whole quickly changes. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit more with the story. Overall with the bosses though, I think boss wise this is the best in the series as well, like by far. I think
the only boss I wish was different, I guess, is the Scorpion. Just because all it is a giant scorpion. Like, it didn't feel...
It's just a scorpion that falls out of the sky, and then it's a means to an end.
It didn't feel tied to the labyrinth.
Yeah.
Narratively, like, they tease it a little bit. Like, Daedalus is talking about it in notes to Icarus, but...
Which is also really good. I like that those callbacks a lot to God of War 2.
There's callbacks this whole game.
Yes.
But the scorpion just felt out of place. It didn't feel Greek. It didn't feel God of War-y. It just, I don't know, it just felt weird. I wish it could have been different.
That's the main one. I will say though, I wish some things went different in Zeus's fight. I wish it would have been more of a grand, bombastic, toe-to-toe fight to end the series. I think it's anticlimactic fighting him and basically beating him to, like, it's not his final forms technically, but fighting him and pretty much being done with him in Gaia's chest is kind of like Like I don't care for that. I like the idea of Kratos taking both of his biggest foes down in one fell stab of the blade of Olympus or whatever. I like that idea, but I felt like they had built Zeus up so much that he deserved his own just like huge bombastic, like flying all over the screen, beating the crud out of each other.
Like
moment.
what he did at the end of God of War 2, basically.
Yeah, kind of. But and I guess they had already done that, so maybe that's why they decided not to do that.
Maybe. Because I think Zeus is really a 4-phase fight when you really think about it, although phase 4 is really just a cutscene where you interact with some buttons.
Yeah.
I think phase 1 is that like I'm gonna kill Zeus moment where they turn it into a we joked about it. It's basically like Mortal Kombat, like it's 2D, which they did in God of War 2 with the silhouette with the other Spartan. So they've expanded, but it reminds me a lot of, and heck, they may even pulled it from it, but it reminds me of the end of Metal Gear Solid 4, where you fight Liquid up top, and it's a 2D total fighting game, and you go through each of those eras. That feels awesome. Then phase 2 is where you fight him out, basically where you fought him in God of War 2, before Gaia shows up, and then you go inside for phase 3, and then phase 4 is his like spirit floaty form. I think phase 2 is the weakest because it's the same as before, and I think fighting inside Gaia, while the fight mechanics are similar in the same out as they were outside, I think the setting actually lifts that up a lot. It does a lot of the heavy lifting. Mechanically, not so much, but narratively it does, I think.
Yeah,
and then
I can
obviously using the blade of Olympus to kill both of them, Zeus and Zeus's mother, or surrogate mother, I suppose, the one who raised him. It's just, it definitely hits.
Yeah, thematically and storytelling wise, I agree that I think that's a good moment. But yeah, I wish there was a little bit of a bigger dust up just between. I would have liked to have seen a moment where kind of like what you get before Gaia shows up, where Zeus is looking around, he's like, you destroyed everything, nothing's left, the only thing that's left is for you and me to kill each other right now. I really like that setup, and then Gaia comes in and is like, no, I'm gonna eat you now, and now you're in my belly. So I just like how that was being set up before Gaia kind of intervenes. And I understand that she has to intervene because she's still lingering. You didn't really tie off that part of the story. So it all makes sense. I wish they could have found a way to maybe write Gaia out of it, kill her in that moment, and then really bring it down to literally all that's left is Zeus and Kratos. And that's it. Everything has toppled except for these two. Kill each other. That would have been a really cool ending. But it's not something that I feel like is like a lingering disappointment about the game or anything like that. I was going to say, do you want to say anything else about the bosses before we potentially move on?
Not about the bosses, no. I did have just one more thing about gameplay in particular.
Sure.
There's a Guitar Hero game in here.
There is. Yeah, we talked about this off air. There's a lot of mishmash of weird mechanics in this game.
Yes. There's the Guitar Hero game where you have to tune the harp. There's what you mentioned earlier with Helios, where you have to like use your hand to block the brightness of the sun. There's
you have to do QTEs from the first person perspective of other characters.
Yes, although you're talking about Poseidon, I think specifically. Yeah, that is awesome. I mean,
that's pretty cool.
Especially, I still remember. I actually wrote about it for my IGN blog back in the day. Like, I said God of War 3 was one of the best game openings of all time, and I think I'd still stand by that to this day. But the first time you play it, and it prompts you to push L3 and R3. It's awesome. And then the screen goes black.
Pop out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just so good.
Because you don't know what's going to happen at first, and then just conk.
Yeah, it's very good. It's good. There's that, and what was the Icarus Ascension, where you fly up the chain between. So a little bit of the Pegasus system from God of War 2, just tweaked a bit. There's a lot of interesting mechanics. The puzzles are still here. They're paced, I think, fairly well. Nothing is too complicated. They actually feel really good because they give you that moment to breathe before you go kill someone else really cool. Yeah. Like it does break it up really well.
A couple other things, since we're mentioning more gameplay things, because I'm thinking of things too. One thing I wanted to mention before is that they add more ways for you to take down enemies that previously were difficult, but specifically. The one example I think about this specifically is like with the digger dudes, the guys who can dig underground. Previously, if they dug underground in the previous games, you just kind of had to wait for them to pop up and then try to dodge it. This game, you can straight up rip them out of the ground with your chains, which is an awesome. Like, I don't feel like you are ever. For every enemy they throw at you, there's a good way mechanically that you can fight back against them and take them down in some way, shape, or form, which I think is a very good decision because you're not standing around waiting, trying to look for an opening like you had to in some of the previous games.
For example, Ascension. Remember the big elemental soldiers? If they went into their powered fate, you had to wait for them to come out of it.
Yes.
Like, that's not fun. Having options and being able to execute combos and choices, that's what's fun.
Yes. And then the one other thing, I told you this the other day when we were talking about the game a little bit. The one other thing I really like about this game is that they don't remove everything that Kratos has obtained since God of War 2. Obviously, they have to do a soft reset to your health and your magic bars at the start of the game because it's a video game and that always happens, and that's just... they always have to nerf the main character back to some lesser form of their former selves so that you can gain upgrades and junk like that over the course of the game. But they don't remove everything. Like, you keep the wings from God of War 2, which is a great... Like, because most video games, like, you get an item like that in one game, and then you go to the next game, and it's like, oh, we're not even going to make him a part of this game anymore. We're going to totally forget that he even had wings once upon a time. No, he keeps them, and it's like a huge element of the game. What's the other thing he carries over? The blade. The blade of Olympus as well. Like, he's still got that tucked away in his hidden back pocket that he just whips out occasionally. He still has the blade on him, and that's his Spartan Rage ability in this game. And it's also his finishing move for a handful of the bosses in the game. Like, they don't have him lose these things that he's gained in the previous installment. And I feel like that's really rare because I can't think of any other games, like even name another, like something like Metal Gear Solid. I mean, that doesn't deal as much with like iconic weapons or anything like that, but like
weapons OSP.
Yeah, but like if Snake obtained something in Metal Gear Solid 1 and then in Metal Gear Solid 2 it started off and he's immediately like, hey, I kept this thing from Shadow Moses. Like I just feel like that stuff doesn't happen in many other games. So it's really cool to see them make sure like, hey, you obtained this stuff over the course of the last game. Let's make sure you can keep it. Let's make it actual like big part of the game and make it there from the outset, not like, oh, Kratos lost his Icarus wings. Daedalus stole them from him because they reminded him of his son, and now he has to kill Daedalus to get the wings back. Or like,
sure,
they didn't do anything dumb like that, like a lot of other games would.
I think a big part of why that is because this game does pick up where God of War 2 ends. There was no time for any of that to go awry. Really, the only thing they strip away is giving you a different blades. They're technically the blades of exile this time, but it goes in line with keeping Kratos as powerful as you want him to be. Like, no one wants to weaken Kratos. That feels cheap. It feels wrong to strip him of his power unexpectedly. I think that's why in God of War 2, when you do pour your energy power
into a sword.
Yeah, but that makes sense for Kratos because he's doing it as a power exchange to take down Athena. You got to remember narratively,
I guess,
like that. But if a lightning bolt struck him and he lost all his power, that would feel cheap. But Kratos making the choice and then you actually executing it on the controller makes sense narratively, and you're in line with it, and it doesn't feel cheap later. And then you're actually motivated to go and become more powerful, which then by the end of that game you are, and that leads you into this momentum and energy. So it's quite good.
I have to say something. I have to chime in with something very funny here. And unless my math is wrong, if you watch, and we can attach this in the show notes, I just had this pulled up and I just watched it on the side a second ago because I mentioned the God of War 3 remaster and when it was announced, and I pulled up the original trailer for it. In the trailer for the God of War 3 remaster announcement, it opens up with words, and the words say 10 legendary years and 7 critically acclaimed games. The 7 games, that means they're counting God of War Betrayal. Am I wrong?
No, they absolutely are. If you go, no joke, if you go to the God of War website today, it says there's like a FAQ at the bottom, and one of the questions is how many God of War games are there, and they say 8. And
pretty good.
They count Betrayal. Betrayal is canon. Sony acknowledges God of War Betrayal.
It's just very funny because it says 7 critically acclaimed games. I'm like, wait a minute, we're doing episode 6 of this podcast. Which one did we miss? And
I've tried to convince him to play God of War Betrayal. He won't do it. It's not too difficult. You just need a PC.
Anyway, back to God of War 3. Let's talk about this game's aesthetic before we get into the nitty-gritty of the story any further, because there are some big things to talk about with the story that I want to hold over. Visually, do you have anything that really stood out to you about this game? I mentioned it before, but I think they do a great job with the color palette in this game, more so than a lot of the ones previously. I think there's a lot of I think they do a really good job with the different style and look of the various gods that you see in this game, and also the different realms in which you come across them, and like where you see them at, and their little home areas that you find them in. I think they do a really good job with that, and I think the environmental design is like top notch. I think most of the areas you're going through in this game are very solid. The only thing I think design wise that I don't really understand, the labyrinth was always a weird section of this game to me. I always I don't know. Is that the labyrinth in Greek lore is actually like the giant stone labyrinth?
Maze,
yeah, it's like a giant maze. And in this game, they made it large boxes suspended in midair, and I never really enjoyed that take.
It felt like a modern. It feels like what Assassin's Creed would do to a Da Vinci invention.
Maybe, except in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, there's literally a labyrinth side quest you can come across, and there's quite literally a labyrinth in that game. And there's a minotaur at the center of it that you can fight.
I was thinking more Assassin's Creed 2, like Ezio when he meets Da Vinci type stuff.
Yeah.
It feels like a modern interpretation of a cool idea that someone could have come up with back in those times. It's unique. And I think the labyrinth is the one place that they really could flex that sort of modern creativity, because Hades is Hades, Mount Olympus is Mount Olympus. Like, the labyrinth had creative freedom. I mean, you've been playing these games up till now on PS Now on your PS5. So you've actually been using your PS5 this whole time. But I've been playing on the PS3. And I want to just say that coming from, visually speaking, not hardware-wise or anything like that, but just visually speaking, coming from the lowest of lows, which was Ascension at 720 with an unstable 30, to a rock-solid 4K 60 HDR game, oh my gosh, I love it so much. This game is beautiful. It pops. I think adding in the HDR via the PS5 gives it this real... Those brights are bright, those darks are dark. It gives it this mood and atmosphere that, I'm not sure if the PS3 really would have had that. It's been a very long time since I've played the PS3 version or even really seen it. So it's just visually, that front feels great. And I think we've mentioned it here in this episode, like Ascension does not look good. It's a major step back from this. And I think a big part of it is that art direction. This game it has the spirit of the PS2 games, but gives it that realistic but not too realistic look. It gives it the God of War Greek world with the power of the PS3, and it pays off. And this game is now over 11 years old, and I think it's aged remarkably well. It's not one of those games that's like, we're going to make Kratos super realistic now because we have all the cell processor. It was, we're going to make God of War 3 look like God of War should look on a modern HD console, and it's paid off in spades.
Yeah, I think as a whole, this series hasn't aged all that poorly, honestly. I think a lot of these character action games from the early 2000s have actually aged pretty well, depending on which one you might be playing. Some of the early Devil May Cry games, maybe not as much. But yeah, I think everything in this series has largely aged pretty well. And this one specifically, I can't see feeling dated or old for the foreseeable future at all. I feel like this one is really, really going to stand the test of time in the coming decade specifically. So yeah, I think visuals, gameplay, all that stuff, it's really top notch on all those fronts. Let's talk about the thing we said we were going to talk about more in depth this time, which is music. If you've listened to this full season so far, you know usually we just kind of shrug our shoulders at this point and we say, hey, it's God of War music again. And we said we were going to make a more concentrated effort this time to try to focus on listening to the songs that are in this game and how we feel about them. I kind of mentioned at the top what my big takeaway was when we briefly talked about the composers, but I really did feel like, again, each area of this game had its own unique vibe and tone, depending on where you were at. And I think the music that they put together really matched that quite well. I think overall the score, there's no single track in this. These games, these first 6 games as a whole, I don't think the music is bad, but there's nothing in it that like stirs something in me the way that, like, again, looking at the next installment in the series, the like I hear the like opening couple notes of God of War 2018, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm all in. But those notes came from here. It's just restrained back. They did, and that's not to say. It's just, I guess I should say, they tried to make a Greek focused soundtrack, and I don't know if I like Greek style music. I think these games, what I've said from the start with all of the music in these games is I think it's good for these games, but I don't really think I just don't think this Greek style of music that they went for, really, I don't know. It just doesn't resonate with me. It's good for the games. It matches the games quite well, but outside of that, I don't know. Did you have any larger thoughts this time? You wrote a lot of notes. Max is holding up a huge notepad.
Well, first of all of those notes weren't just the music. It's maybe 3/4 of a page. It's music focused. I should start. I have so many notepads laying around exactly like that. I should start doing the same thing. This is all note stuff of just different things that we do. The music. Let's just God of War 3 in general. It's big. It's loud. It's moving in the sense of energy to keep you moving, just like the game's pacing does. It is in lockstep with the mechanics here and the narrative and your goals pushing you forward. It is in step with you. But today I deliberately took, normally when I work, I listen to a podcast or I listen to music, but music with lyrics and things, or video game music, it depends. But today I deliberately put on the God of War 3 soundtrack and went, all right, I'm taking notes. And my notes aren't all that thrilling. There are a few songs I like, and just kind of my general thoughts, which I've iterated here. Like the main theme and swell that, the dun, 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 and it just kind of feels mystical, which is in line because this is Greek myth. And then you put the choir in and it is transportive in that way. It feels like something you would see or hear in an old movie or imagine in a book or picture alongside it. It really, I think that the best compliment I can give it is because they do go together. And while the music during the gameplay from like moment to moment or while you're going through the environment, while it doesn't necessarily stand out, those core themes, which I wrote down as, let's see, Revenge, Falling is one of them. Like these names don't stand out, but when you hear it, you go, that's God of War. That's God of War. And I think that's what's quite powerful about it. They really do have a unique sound. And those 2-3 themes, particularly with the choirs, that's the identity of this music. And when I hear it, I get excited. And I think that while I can't name the songs or always hum it, when I hear it, I know it's about to go down, and I'm excited about that. And I think that is, I mean, overall, the legacy of God of War's music up to this point, and I think what Bear McCreary does with that legacy really honors it in a great way. And we'll talk about that in the next episode. For kind of just a brief, kind of an example in another Sony IP, look at Uncharted. Uncharted 1 through 3 was Greg Edmondson. And then Uncharted 4 and Lost Legacy was Henry Jackman, who does big Hollywood blockbuster movies. He did Winter Soldier and a couple other Marvel movies. And while there's some respect to the original Uncharted trilogy, Henry Jackman's music is different. And it does capture the adventure, and I like that music a lot. It's different, and you can tell. And it's not a bad different per se. It's different. But I do think that God of War 2018, that's God of War. I watched the E3 2018 reveal, E3 2016 reveal of the 2018 game. And then do you remember that conference? They opened with an orchestra.
I remember that very clearly.
And you could hear it, and who knows? Maybe you didn't know it was God of War because you had only played it a year prior, but like you're like, that's God of War? We're playing God of War music? Like, that's big. I think when you can get a sound that an audience immediately associates with your IP, you've struck gold.
Yeah.
Musically speaking. And God of War's done that. And I feel like through the season, we've not been harsh, but we've been dismissive.
Yes.
And
not intentionally so. Like, I don't think any of these soundtracks are bad. The thing that I've mentioned before is that none of these soundtracks are really ones that I would want to pop on just for the heck of it. But at the same time, I wouldn't do that for 95% of game soundtracks. The only like orchestra-based video game music that I can think of that I would intentionally go out of my way to listen to is for, I'll let you take a guess. It's
what you listen to?
Like orchestra-based music for a soundtrack for a very popular video game series.
I would say Zelda.
No. That's a pretty good one. Halo. Halo's the one that I think of.
Yeah. Oh, which again, Halo's got like the theme. I mean, when Infinite multiplayer was coming out, people were, tweeting about how the start screen gives them chills because it's those monks come in and then it picks up and they go da 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 da.
And we've talked about how the main God of War theme here throughout this series has felt recycled a little bit too much. The one thing I'll give it credit for in this game, because they do tweak it a little bit more, they make it sound more menacing than before, which I like. The previous games have sounded like this grand, like almost like adventurous type of theme. This one kind of changes it and makes it and turns it into that. Turns it from that into, oh boy, he coming now.
That actually was one of the goals, because I swore I was going to have something to say about the music this time. I watched the behind the scenes music video specifically that's included with God of War 3. And I'm paraphrasing here, but the quote was along the lines of telling the orchestra players, any melodic or nice notes that you feel coming on or whatever, don't go there. Divert. Go for the brutal. Go for the hard, the shocking, the powerful. Like, go in that direction. Like, that clearly was the aim of this particular soundtrack.
It matches like the box art very well, which is just Kratos looking mad, like he's done everything up to this point and now it's time to roll. And so in that sense, I think even the main theme for this game specifically has been altered in such a way that is good. Again, though, but like, I couldn't tell you anything about, like you mentioned Uncharted. I couldn't tell you anything about those soundtracks really all that much either, other than da 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 da. Like, and so like if we did a series on Uncharted right now, I'd be like, yep, that main theme's still pretty good. Like, I don't know. I don't know. And it's not like I've not been listening over the course of this series. I think the music they have in this game in all the games, is largely quite good. There was only one that I remember we were like, I don't think this is actually a good soundtrack. I think it may have been for Ascension or for...
Let's just pile it all on Ascension.
Yeah, we'll just keep piling it on to Ascension here. The music, though, it's good. I think, and we could talk about this more, I think we'll have more to say about the next soundtrack too. But spoiler alert, the one thing I do like about the God of War 2018 soundtrack a lot more is that there's just a diversity of instruments. It is not this orchestral choir like, okay, now let's do this big bombastic video game score with an orchestra.
It has
like
a bit more of a range.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that they fold in there, which I like a lot with that. But anyway, we'll talk about that more next time. Let's close this out and kind of finalize this discussion talking about the story, because there are a lot of things that we have not talked about with the story. I don't know where you want to start. There are some... I guess the thing here that we've talked about a lot of things, I feel like, naturally over the course of this game, especially when we talked about the boss fights and things like that, because those are integral pillars of the story in this game. I think a lot of the things that happen in the closing moments of this game, and it's specifically maybe everything involving Pandora and Kratos as well, is kind of the central... they're the central characters of this game. How did that all... I don't know. Let's start just with Pandora, I guess. How did you feel about Kratos and her? Because that whole situation feels very forced to me, where he just is like, I'm going to project that this is my daughter. Like, he goes from he goes full Joel Miller in a span of 10 minutes in this game.
That's a really great way to put it. I wrote down in my notes early in the playthrough, before you even really meet Pandora, I wrote down, not sure if I've ever loved the surrogate daughter in Pandora angle. And I said, we shall see. And I still don't really love it, because it goes from 0 to 60, like you said. He is very dismissive of Pandora until Athena tells him Pandora can remove the flame of Olympus. Then suddenly it pivots, not from I need you to get to Zeus, which is the logical next step, but it shifts from... I will now save and protect you at all costs. You are my daughter.
You're Calliope 2.
Calliope
Come here.
2.0. It does feel forced. It's very quick. But it leads... The moments that come out of it later, specifically in the darkness, that's like... This game, I wrote down...
It feels like they needed a surrogate character for that moment there, with like Kratos' like internal shift. Like, who's going to be somebody that we can finally get to like change him a little bit?
So the game's overall like themes, if you had like one or two words that were really the like core theme of God of War 3, it's not vengeance, although marketing would like you to think that. It's fear and hope. Like Pandora's box in this game, its context isn't necessarily like the plagues of humanity, but it's different emotions. And when Kratos kills one of the gods, while it does release certain things, it's emotions. And in the end, what Kratos has and ultimately gives mankind is not free will per se, but hope, which Athena wants to take from them and control.
Which I have thoughts on that.
We'll talk about that. Hold on that. But it's fear and hope are like the core of this game, and ultimately everything Kratos does is driven out of regret and fear of what has happened, the choices that he made, and ultimately the killing of his own wife and daughter. And he never had hope. I mean, God of War 1.
He never. I think forgiveness is a big thing too. He doesn't forgive himself for anything he's ever done, and he has to come to grips with that.
Yeah, but think back to God of War 1. The gods of Olympus have abandoned me. There is no hope. And then he tries to commit suicide. Kratos has never had hope, and ultimately that is given to him through Pandora. Now, his relationship with Pandora is accelerated very, very quickly. It doesn't have time to breathe, but the payoff in the end it brings Kratos where he needs to go, not only for where we know he goes in 2018, but to wrap up this trilogy, because this game was treating it like the end of Kratos' story. They wanted to tie all the knots and really wrap it up. And so it just, I mean, I like Kratos' arc here. And maybe it's more the arc of the whole series, not the arc of God of War 3. But I do like where Kratos starts and where he ends.
The other thing, we need to have a deeper discussion about, I mean, everything involving Pandora's box too, and what that does, and it corrupted Zeus, and that's why he went off his rocker at the end of God of War 1. Do you like that, all of that? Because I think I preferred it where it was just like, nah, Zeus is just kind of not a great person in general, and they fear Kratos.
I think there's like the surface level of like, oh, he opened the box, which he shouldn't have been able to do, and like he got the power to kill a god. The power to kill a god is hope, and what in fact, like opening Pandora's box released all of those different emotions, and Zeus was afflicted with fear. Yeah, and so like I like that. I like that big, overarching emotional touch points.
And Pandora's box is a huge key component of like Greek lore, so I'm fine with that playing like a big role here with these games, and having that event from the first game play a larger role, because it really is like in Greek lore. I don't remember all of it, but all of the evil and all the bad stuff within the world is like buried in that box, and no one's ever supposed to open it ever, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And so when Kratos just kind of flippantly opens it in the first game, he's like, now I'll get big and I'll punch Ares. They don't really focus on the fact that he opened the box, and he probably shouldn't have been able to do that. And that's why it was at the center of Kronos' backpack.
They recontextualized that event from the first game in, I think, a more powerful way. In the beginning, in God of War 1, it's the power to kill a god is what he's going there to get. And you're right, he gets big and rolls around and fights Ares. But with God of War 3 kind of shifting the view of the box, while yes, he did get big and all that stuff, there's magic or whatever, he unleashed, those emotions that I was talking about. And that alters the gods of Olympus and not just mankind. And I like that shift. I think it works. It kind of just elevates it a little bit. Not saying like Kratos is this great character all of a sudden, but it does. It just feels a little bit nicer, more rounded, not shallow. There's some depth here.
I think the one issue I do potentially have with it, though, is that the gods from the beginning were never really portrayed in this world as great people. Ares was clearly not good. And the gods just kind of let him run rampant and do his thing, and they never really tried to put him in any sort of check. So then when Kratos comes into power, it's implied that they fear him, or at least Zeus does, and Zeus doesn't feel comfortable with him being a god, and he tries to scheme and find a way to undermine his power, but they were also totally fine with Ares just kind of running around unchecked left and right, which feels like they're enabling him in some sense.
This is all shifted in the context of those prequels, because you have to remember there's a prophecy of the marked warrior and all this stuff. So like Zeus is actively trying to stop the whole my son will kill me someday like I did with my father.
Well, that kind of changes. Like the idea that Zeus has been corrupted by the box too is also kind of weird to me, because he seems to have like a very personal disdain for Kratos, who is his son, and he like has regrets from the past. That like, is he just, I don't know. It's very strange to me that like, had he not been afflicted by the box, like, is there or the evils of Pandora's box, is there a part of them that like would have liked to have like reconciled with Kratos at some point?
I don't think so, because
like there's a lot of different like interpersonal like relationships that you have to kind of recontextualize and re-examine within this series under the guise of box made people bad. So
I don't
gets
think it's just box made people bad. I think it just leaned into this prophecy that was written into a prequel, and
it wasn't necessary. It wasn't like it took him over and he became like a Sith Lord or something like that. Mm-hmm. Like it sowed the fear within him that then guided his actions in the other games.
Yeah, and Zeus is supposed to be the god of Olympus, and to have fear is actually quite crippling, I think. And
yeah,
they don't really explore, like, Zeus doesn't have all these like great deep moments in this game, or really any game.
No.
It's all
there's not a whole lot of deep story. They try to get a little deeper with the story here at the final like 15 minutes, and there's a bunch of things. The other two things I want to talk about, one involves Kratos and how he goes into the next game. We'll save that for the end though. We got to talk about Athena, because we've talked about her a fair amount over the course of this series. And I even think in a previous episode we may have talked about some of the things she does here at the end of this game, and how she is kind of not really the big bad behind it all, but it's shown, her hand is shown, and she kind of has she was playing her own cards. She was playing her own game of chess in the background. I think I've said before, I think I said in an earlier episode that I've never really liked that. I still don't really like it. I think the moment he has, and again, we'll see how I feel once we replay the other game, but like I'm fine with her having her own motives, but I think her own motives are almost too broad. Like, oh, hope should be mine and I should give that to people. What?
I don't
like, huh? Like if Kratos is,
I don't think she wanted to give it to people. She wanted to control it. She wanted to be the source of it.
Yeah. So when Kratos unleashes it for everybody, she obviously doesn't like that. But it's the other thing too is like hope is such an undefined, like, it's like a thematic idea more so than it is this like tangible thing. Obviously it's implied there's power with it because he kills gods through the power of hope, but also it's not like Kratos has this tangible thing that he is holding on to. It's like this idea in a sense. And so it's a very weird thing that she wants to control this source of great power that is also supposed to be reflective of Kratos's changing heart at the same time, if that makes any sense.
I can see that. Maybe I'm doing heavy lifting or like interpreting on the game's behalf. Like maybe I'm just carrying this too far. But I look at it kind of like Athena in the context of the series up until her death in God of War 2 is always has watched out for Kratos, seemingly out of positive, angles, not necessarily for evil purposes.
Like she's been the only one in his corner, basically.
Yeah, and she's also kind of been second fiddle to a lot of the other gods. Ares was taking over Athens, her town, and Zeus and her have disagreements and things like that. And ultimately she tries to save Zeus and Olympus. Like she serves Zeus, and like I've mentioned in a previous episode, when she died, she ascended to that higher power, and she could have been like the one in control of everything. She could have been the god, not just a god, but the god. Now, I don't necessarily know why, maybe it's because she was a nice lady or whatever, but I don't know why other gods aren't in that ethereal plane with her.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not explained, but just accepting that part at face value, like she finally had an opportunity to be the one in control. And I think she thought she could manipulate Kratos like she has been to a certain extent the whole time. And, she's trying to be the puppet master, and it ultimately doesn't pan out for her in the end. And it's, Kratos didn't stab himself because he wanted to give mankind hope. Kratos stabbed himself because he was done being used and a servant, and he was done. And it wasn't out of a place of I have no hope, I'm done. It was out of a place of I'm done and I want to go be with my wife and daughter done. Like my job is I can go rest. It's, Steve Rogers at the end of Endgame. Like I've deserved this now. Ultimately, he doesn't die for whatever reason, and goes on. But I like it, and again, I'm also carrying a little bit of 2018 into this because
we'll talk about that.
I know
in 1 second. The one other thing I wanted to close off with Athena's, though, is that you're right. She is trying to be this puppet master and have control of these things. But even at the end of the game, she's like surprised by how things have played out and like, oh, I didn't expect you to retain the power of hope. Why don't I like, she's trying to play puppet master with something that she doesn't fully understand herself, which I guess is not.
She thought it was in the box. She didn't realize that it was inside Kratos, which is, things other movies do. It's like, oh, the power was actually here, or it was in this gem, or it was the spirit was in you, not in this object. One of those types of switches. It just, she didn't expect it, but she wasn't like clueless. Like she basically was like, give it to me, Kratos.
Yeah.
And Kratos was like, nah.
So Kratos, he's finished everything that he wants to do. By the end of this game, the next time we see him, he's a much different person. The game obviously tries to set up a lot of where he's going in the final about 10 minutes of this game. Maybe you could say even with the relationship with Pandora, it tries to show that he still has like a softer side to him as well. And that he doesn't want to be this brute all the time, but everything he cares for, even a little bit, gets ripped away from him at one point or another. Do you think the game does a good job of setting up where we know that he goes in the future?
I think so, yes. Because, and I'm sure part of it is because we've played all of this era of God of War back to back to back. All very close to each other in the last couple of months. But, especially really coming after Chains of Olympus, like shoving Calliope away, which was a moment I really disliked. Having him be dead again
for the fifth time
in,
or whatever.
In the darkness, and finding his wife and daughter and embracing them again, which he does in God of War 1. But this time, forgiving himself, which is the thing he kept asking the gods for. He, get rid of these nightmares from me. Like, forgive me, please. I've done my part. Like, he does it himself. He realizes he has the power to forgive himself, I think, and have hope for the future in his own life. But I think it's actually pretty powerful. It's definitely a high moment for Kratos as far as emotionally speaking. It kind of reminded me.
He doesn't have many of them up to this point.
I know. And it reminded me a little bit of like the sorrow fight in MGS3, like wading through. There was one part in the darkness where you were like swimming in blood of your enemies or whatever. Not quite as like cool or good as the sorrow, but this moment of like really soaking in every wrong that Kratos has done and forgiving himself for it. And even in his death, or self-stabbing, I suppose, because he doesn't die, the end of the credits shows that he has crawled away. And I even think that is a sign of hope. Like he had hope in that moment for the rest of his life. And it would
he jumps off another cliff for, again, like the fifth time.
Yeah, but it ultimately leads to him finding a new partner and having a son, who we know he cares immensely for. Again, this is with our knowledge of where it all goes, but taking that into context, I think it's actually a really strong ending for this phase of Kratos' story.
Yeah, I think I like everything they do in the darkness, where they make you revisit everything again, which felt a little too trite, to be totally honest. Like, hey, you want to see Kratos' wife and daughter die for the 80th time in the series? It felt like Uncle Ben getting shot by the end of God of War 3. It's like, okay, we know. But they do make you revisit it one more time, but it feels like there's actually character development with it this time for the first time ever, rather than him just being like, oh, I'm still tortured by this, somebody help me. He actually kind of re-examines the situation, is like, and and with some help from Pandora, learns how to kind of finally resolve it internally. My problem with that is he doesn't seem to, maybe not my problem. That whole darkness section is more metaphorical, sort of. It feels like, or maybe not metaphorical, but it's not something that he actively remembers, because he wakes up and he immediately kind of acknowledges that he doesn't know exactly why things are he says something that he doesn't know what's going on or why he feels a certain way, I think. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
A little bit.
He says something along those lines to kind of acknowledge that he doesn't really remember the events that the player has just experienced. But clearly he's been affected by it to the degree that, like once Zeus is dead, he stabs himself, or you think he's killing himself, but he doesn't. And he's just kind of reached his end point. He wants to move on and get a fresh start. And I think that's all good. And that establishes pretty well where he's going in the future. I don't know how much time is between God of War and God of War 3. Maybe we can figure that out. I know we've got a whole timeline here pulled up. I guess the best thing I can say is that this does feel like the end of God of War 3 feels like a good starting point for where we know he goes in the future. Because obviously by the time this game ends, he's not going to be Dad Kratos that we know he is in the next game. Because in fact, Dad Kratos in the next game is still very much this Kratos here, and he has to keep this part of himself in check and like keep this version of himself from coming out in that game, which I still like a lot.
And quite interesting enough, he's to a degree consumed by fear in 2018.
Yeah.
Fear of
he is
being a terrible father, and also
fear of people knowing who he is.
Yeah, and a fear of his son killing him. So, lots of things. The timeline, Wikipedia just says many years. Someone on Reddit speculates 1500. So, whatever.
I mean, I guess 1500 years would allow a gaping hole in your chest to heal up over that period of time. No, that would, I don't know if it's 1500 years. It's quite a long time, but he has to, this feels like a good, at least, starting point and a good first step for where we know he ends up. And thematically, they start to set those things up pretty well on a tee. The final 10 minutes of this game really sets up on a tee the next game nicely. And it makes me that much more excited that we are doing that one next.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Is there anything else you want to chime in about with God of War 3 here? Or the Greek, a larger discussion of these Greek games as a whole?
No, I think we've final
this is a
nail
longer
here on the
episode
Greek.
than normal.
This is I think our longest episode.
I think it is. Yeah, I feel like this is our longest episode we've done so far, but there's a lot to cover in this game, and I think we really touched on quite a bit of it and did so well. So that's the end of episode 6 of season 2 of Chapter Select, all about God of War 3. And as I mentioned, next time around will be our quote-unquote final episode of this season. I say that because, as we've mentioned before, when Ragnarok comes out, we will be adding an amended 8th episode to this season at some point in 2022. We will be, fingers crossed, that it comes out next year. Wow, it's almost 2022 and that game is going to come out in that year. That's a really cool thing.
It's supposed to come out.
Anyway, so we'll be adding a Ragnarok episode at some point in the near future, but episode 7 will be all about God of War 2018, which we have intentionally left to the end, and I think our discussion on that game will be very good, because as I have said before, I like that game a lot. That's one of my favorite games ever, and there's a lot to dig into with that one. So be sure to come back around next time as we dive into that game. But as for this episode, thank you again for listening. If you want to keep following along with all of our other doings here at Chapter Select, you can follow us on Twitter at Chapter Select. We also encourage you to subscribe or leave a review in whatever podcast feed you might be listening to the show on. You can also check out the show on YouTube as well. Max puts together a great video edit for all of these episodes as well that I would encourage you to, at the very least, if you don't want to watch or listen to the whole thing that way, just go check it out, because he does a very good job with those, and he includes a lot of Easter eggs in those episodes that I don't think people will ever see.
I just send Logan all the jokes, basically.
Yeah, Max tucks away a lot of really good jokes in those video versions of these episodes. So I encourage you to go check those out. But yeah, otherwise you can follow us on Twitter. Max is at MaxRoberts143, and I am at Moreman12. I almost said Max the White. No, I am at Moreman12 on Twitter. Max the White no longer exists. But that's everything for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. And we will be back here next time to close out Season 2 with God of War. Until then, bye-bye.
Adios. Chapter Select is a Max Frequency production. This episode was research, produced, and edited by me, Max Roberts. Season 2 is hosted by Logan Moore and myself, and it's all about God of War. For more on this season, go to chapterselect.com/season 2. To check out previous seasons, go to chapterselect.com. I never went all out like I did for God of War Ascension.
That's pretty funny. I can't believe you. I didn't know you were that big of a God of War junkie.
Oh, I love God of War games. 2 is my favorite, followed by Ghost of Sparta. Like they can be pretty good games. I mean, it's essentially square and triangle the whole way through, but they're pretty fun. And
they're fun. I played through the series recently. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I'm huge on it. I'm excited to see what 4 looks like.
I think it's safe to say that it'll probably get shown off next week, and I'm excited to see it as well. It needs a little bit of variety in the series. We won't get too deep into a God of War discussion, but they need to just mix it up a little bit.
We'll see. We'll see what they do, but yeah, all out for God of War Ascension.